You're watching PM Agenda. Let's go to our panel of politicians this afternoon, and we're joined from Sydney by Green Senator Lee Rhiannon and from Perth by Liberal MP Dennis Jensen. Welcome to you both. I want to start on the Prime Minister's overseas tour through South Korea, Japan and now China. Trade, the big focus. Dennis Jensen, let me start with you. There has been a bit of a mixed response to particularly the Japanese trade agreement that's now been finalised. How do you see this? Do you see it as the best Australia could have got?
I think realistically that's the case, David. You can hold out forever waiting for the absolutely perfect agreement to be reached and actually never achieve it. It's better to take something where you've achieved almost everything that you want. This is unambiguously a good agreement for Australia. I mean, $1.4 billion in exports in beef and the trade barriers there are coming down. Clearly a very good deal for Australia.
Lee Rhiannon, how do you see these trade agreements? Are they in Australia's best interest?
Well, I was interested in Dennis's comments because we don't actually get to see the trade agreements. What we're all relying on is what the Prime Minister tells us. And he's obviously going to tell us it's a good deal, but there's no guarantee prices are going to come down. We've heard the best detail, some of the detail, maybe a 15% decrease in tariffs over 15 years, promises about price decreases. But you need to see the details of these agreements. And now there's this whole style that trade agreements are part of the secrecy that this government's becoming known for.
But how do you negotiate these things in public? Don't they at some level have to be done between officials or ministers in privacy?
Well, I would actually dispute that, but even accepting that that's how it should work, surely once it's been signed, it should be released. But this document still hasn't been released, and that's what's very wrong.
Well, Dennis Jensen, would you like to see more of the detail here?
Well, obviously, David, the detail will come out. It's just recently been signed. The Prime Minister is still overseas. It's reasonable to wait for him to come back to actually release further details of it. But, the simple fact is the United States are actually looking at this agreement, and they are very impressed with our agreement, and they would like something similar for themselves.
Well, in fact, the Japanese one, Lee Rhiannon, has been described as the best Japan's offered any country. If that does turn out to be the case, once you've had a look at it, it does have to be ratified through Parliament. So where do you think the Greens would end up on this? Would you actually stand in the way of something that is at least better than the status quo?
Well, again, I don't think you really can say that, David. I'm surprised that you say that so confidently. And in terms of ratifying it, that's all the Parliament does. We don't get to actually vote on the detail that's in that agreement. And this is where we have a big problem. Like the Trans-Pacific Partnership, 2 years of secret negotiations, where we understand often the corporations are getting the details, but civil society, your organisations that look after public interests, your unions who are protecting labour standards, environment groups protecting the natural environment, they're not getting that detail. We've really got a problem in how these negotiations occur.
When he does get into the talks in China, it's not just trade on the agenda for the Prime Minister. Tony Abbott will also no doubt be discussing regional security as well. Dennis Jensen, given how China has behaved in the region in recent years, what sort of message do you think the Australian PM should be delivering?
Well, I think the message should be keep steady, no overreaching, and be aware that there are, for instance, in the South China Sea and the East China Sea, multiple claimants to islands. You cannot sort out those disputes in a bilateral sense. It has to be multilateral, and just keep a lid on it. Don't let it get hot.
Lee Rhiannon, do you share that view that I guess a measured approach is necessary on this, or should there be some fairly direct language from the Prime Minister?
Well, look, I do think it needs to be measured because, remember, we're not clean skins on this ourselves. We have US troops stationed in Australia. for the first time since the Second World War. I mean, that does send a very damaging message about Australia's position in the world with regard to foreign affairs to the Chinese. And there is a US troop build-up in a number of Asian countries. So having a measured response certainly has to be the starting point here.
So are you saying we should not have those American Marines in the top end?
Oh, not at all. Having US troops operating out of Darwin, the build-up that's going to come in Western Australia, that's not about making Australia safer, more secure. It's really playing the big brother. We're back to playing the sheriff, but even more extreme than when Mr Howard was Prime Minister. The troops are actually here. That's not a wise way to develop peaceful and cooperative relations in our neighbourhood. And at the same time, we're cutting back on foreign aid to these countries, and then we have the US troops and all these military exercises in the area. It's not a wise way to work.
But they have been here a little while. What do you think it has cost Australia in diplomatic terms?
Look, I think it is actually hard to measure that because, again, we're not getting those analyses where clearly the current government's not going to say that there's been any complaints about it. But the US is the world's superpower. There's thousands of troops stationed in Australia. That does send us a clear message to our neighbours. And China is been in our sights from different times. You put all that together and, you know, it's time to reassess how we're operating in our own region.
Dennis Jensen, I'll just get you to comment on that. Do you think this has been a bad look for Australia, having those Marines in the top end?
No, I think Lee's going into complete overreach here and, you know, quite frankly, it's very unhelpful. The simple fact is we've been an ally of the United States since World War II. We've had a signed alliance, the ANZUS alliance, for over 60 years now. Our alliance and our partnership with the United States is very well understood by China and other countries around the world. There's really no issue here to sort of hyperventilate and make out that this is a massive shock to the region and that it's destabilising our position, quite frankly, is ludicrous.
Let me turn to some other news. The Royal Commission began today into union governance, and Dennis Jensen, to you first on this. What do you think this is really all about?
I think when you have a look at the fact that Michael Williamson has been found guilty of corruption, you've got the issue with Craig Thomson, and when you have whistleblowers such as Cathy Jackson coming out and she's howled down by the union movement, and oh, nothing to see here, nothing to see here, it is clear that there are large problems with corruption within the union movement, and the way to get to the bottom of it clearly is through a Royal Commission.
What about the point, though, that the courts have dealt with Craig Thomson and Michael Williamson, that you have law enforcement bodies in the courts to deal with that?
Well, the point is, it was a very difficult thing to get both of those cases up. Cathy Jackson was howled down by the union movement. How much of this sort of thing is occurring and we're not hearing about and is not being taken to the courts? That is for the Royal Commission to delve into and find out.
Lee Rhiannon, the point made by the head of the Commission today that honest union officials have nothing to fear from this. Do you believe that?
It will be interesting. It's always interesting to see how Royal Commissions play out and who ends up in the sites. But what we need to start with here is the terms of reference, because that's actually very informative. Because this isn't an objective Royal Commission, it's highly political. It's highly political because it's targeting working people's conditions. Because if you work to undermine unions, that's what the result will be. And why I mention the terms of reference, you need to go back to the 1990s in New South Wales, when the former Premier Nick Greiner set up the Giles Royal Commission. And that Royal Commission's terms of reference allowed it to look at both companies and unions. And it was similar language used at the time, all about corrupt unions. And then have a look at the evidence. The evidence, official evidence from Justice Giles, no corruption amongst union officials, but did find corruption amongst various dodgy contractors. And that's
but do you accept
That cannot happen.
In the last year or so, though, that we have seen problems, found in the HSU, alleged in the CFMEU, and being investigated in the AWU. Isn't there a need for a look into some of this?
Well, if we're going to look into unions, let's look into the corporations that are providing the jobs and how that's done. But what we also, let's remember that we have a court system, and certainly what happened with the HSU, it simply has done so much damage to the union movement. Terrible actions there by those two individuals. But we do have a criminal justice system. If there was evidence with the CFMEU, why isn't that being referred to the courts? So that could be fast-tracked. But let's ensure that if there is a Royal Commission, you're not just looking at unions, you are able to look at the corporations. Senator Brandis has set this Royal Commission up in a way that that's not possible. Now, that's one-sided, it's biased, it's political.
We've got to take a quick break. Lee Rhiannon, Dennis Jensen, stay with us. I want to talk about the new Senate taking shape from July. Who has a mandate for what? Don't go away.
Yep, you go there. And you. Perfect. This way. Everyone ready? I bought a...
On a moonless night, the gods wanted to bring sparkle to the party. Ferrero Rocher. Share golden moments.
Did you know? At Inner Health, we're probiotic experts and have been producing probiotics for over 20 years. Our team of specialised microbiologists research, test and care for the probiotics, so you're provided with a quality product.
Have you had your Health Plus today?
Right now, get Budget Direct's smarter online discounts. 20% off car insurance and 30% off home and contents insurance. Get a quote today.
Smarter, cheaper, winner!
When we're busy looking for an investment property, we can get so tied up looking for the right suburb with the right returns, it's easy to miss some big questions that could save us thousands. Like, is going straight to your bank really going to get you the best investment loan? Aussie compares hundreds of loans from different lenders, including the big banks, to help find the investment loan that's right for you. Because we reckon if you want to be better off, it's smart to ask.
The mid-season sale is on at Myer with 15% off small electrical appliances by Breville, DeLonghi and Dyson. And buy 2 toys, get a third free. Conditions and exclusions apply. Not available online or with other offers. Ends Sunday. Where's my store?
In far north Queensland, we found Terry, an ecologist working way upstream. If he doesn't do his job up here, there's no fishing industry downstream.
I'm heading back with the results.
That's great. Let me know if the river rises.
Most days, his Ford Ranger is more boat than truck. But in the years he's had it, Terry will tell you it's never once let him down.
Start the week with a different viewpoint. Join me as we look at the crucial national issues from outside Canberra's politically correct parliament.
That's the sort of rhetoric that we're protesting against.
Sorry, rhetoric. There'll be big interviews, lively debates.
The Labor Party has been re-energised.
Insightful analysis.
Very little confidence in the state of the economy.
It'll be unashamedly mainstream and there'll be unashamedly strong opinions.
You say it's a contradiction, Chris. I don't accept that it is.
Join me for Viewpoint, live Sunday nights on Sky News.
You're watching PM Agenda. More with our panel, Lee Rhiannon and Dennis Jensen, in just a moment. First, let's check the news headlines with Helen Daly.
Thanks very much, David. South African sprint star Oscar Pistorius has arrived at the Pretoria court to again take the witness stand over the shooting of his girlfriend Reeva Steenkamp. Yesterday, Pistorius gave an emotional recount of the moment he shot 4 times and killed Reeva Steenkamp for the first time during his murder trial in South Africa. The Paralympic gold medalist broke down in the stand, weeping uncontrollably as he provided the court with details surrounding the fateful night. More audio signals consistent with the black box of Malaysia Airlines Flight 370 have been detected. Authorities say the acoustic signals were detected yesterday. One was held for about 5.5 minutes, the other around 7 minutes. It's now been 33 days since the plane went missing, which is 3 days beyond the life of a normal black box beacon's battery. The search area has been narrowed, and retired Air Chief Marshal Angus Houston says he doesn't believe it'll be long before an automated underwater vessel is deployed. Prime Minister Tony Abbott will stress how urgently he wants to see free trade talks with China resolved when he meets the Premier, Li Keqiang. It comes after Mr Abbott wrapped up his visit to South Korea with a symbolic visit to the demilitarised zone. It's divided the Korean peninsula for 60 years. Tony Abbott will be welcomed to China with a formal ceremony. A bilateral meeting will be held between the two leaders, where it's expected free trade will feature heavily. Former New South Wales Minister Eddie Obeid has again given evidence at a corruption inquiry in Sydney. Obeid's much anticipated appearance before the Independent Commission Against Corruption began with an admission he had raised the subject of Australian water holdings with several Labor heavyweights. The ICAC is probing allegations the Obeid family had a secret stake in AWH and stood to make millions of dollars through a potential public-private partnership with the New South Wales Government. Former State Ministers Joe Tripodi and Tony Kelly are due to give evidence. Toyota will recall 6.58 million vehicles globally to fix faults in the steering and seats in one of the largest recalls to date in the global auto industry. The world's biggest automaker is recalling certain Yaris, Urban Cruiser, RAV4 and Hilux models after identifying faults in the steering column, wiring harnesses and seat railings of 1,058 vehicles. As a result, Toyota Australia will recall approximately 179,000 current generation Hilux vehicles that were built between April 04 and December 09. Gales up to 240 kilometres an hour are expected to lash far north Queensland when the strongest cyclone since Yazi crosses the coast, expected to be on Friday. Cyclone Ita is due to intensify into a Category 4 storm early tomorrow morning and cross the coast north of Cooktown on Friday night. It's about 800 kilometres off land and poses a significant threat to sparse communities between Cape Grenville and the Lockhart River, with strong gusts, storm surges and heavy rain due to begin tomorrow. In sport, the Melbourne Storm have decided not to appeal Jordan McLean's 7-match ban. The 22-year-old was suspended for a dangerous throw last week following the tackle which resulted in Alex McKinnon breaking his neck. Despite the decision, the Storm admit they're concerned about ambiguity in the NRL's rules around lifting tackles. And the weather around the rest of the nation for tomorrow: heavy rain and showers contracting towards the southeast with thundery showers across the tropics. David Spears, back to you.
Helen, thank you very much for that. Let's return to our panel of politicians, Liberal MP Dennis Jensen in Perth and the Green Senator Lee Rhiannon in Sydney. I want to turn to where the week began, and that was the West Australian Senate election, the results of which saw big swings against the government and Labor and big gains for the Greens and the Palmer United Party. Dennis Jensen, as the West Australian amongst us, what do you think was the message from the West, from the voters there?
Well, I think the message from the West is that clearly they want to get rid of the carbon tax and the mining tax. The simple fact is that in terms of the Conservative vote, when you look at the primary vote, it has gone up since the last election, which you wouldn't really expect given the fact that we now have an incumbent Conservative government. Yes, we did suffer a swing against the coalition, and that's to be expected in what's essentially a by-election. But ultimately, the Conservative side of politics, despite the fact that you have an incumbent Conservative government, did increase their primary vote.
Well, yes, through the Palmer United Party. How concerned are you as a Liberal MP about the political threat from Palmer?
Well, it's obviously something that we recognise. I mean, you know, the Palmer Party spent a huge amount of money in Western Australia on the advertising. You couldn't get away from it. TV ads, radio ads, it was wall to wall. It was difficult to get away from it. So obviously that advertising had an impact, but how many times you can do that, I don't know. But I mean, it's not a good thing where, you know, obviously a massive amount of spending and advertising like that has an effect. It's not a good thing. I mean, we're getting towards the US system here where massive amounts of money can actually achieve a result.
Lee Rhiannon, Dennis Jensen says the message was that voters do want to repeal the carbon tax and the mining tax. I'm sure you'd take issue with that.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, he might be staying on message, but that doesn't mean the message is correct. After you saw the vote where both Labor and the Coalition barely together got 50% and the Coalition's vote went down. So all those statements from the Prime Minister that this by-election was a referendum on the mining tax and the carbon tax, I mean, he's really been caught out now for somebody who loves beating the mandate drum. So where we are now is that we're obviously very pleased with the Greens vote. We'll be negotiating in the Senate because the wise thing to do would be to keep the price on pollution in place. Like the reports coming out about climate, the runaway climate change really do require action. Like the way this government wants to wind it back is really criminal.
Well, let me just touch on that. Dennis Jensen, we know you in particular don't buy a lot of those reports that Lee Rhiannon is talking about. I assume you're talking about the IPCC's latest report that was last week or the week before. Dennis Jensen, how do you view this, these sorts of reports?
Well, I mean, obviously you've got to look at them very carefully, but with the latest report, you've got to view it as they have taken the first report that came out last year as a given in terms of impacts. And I mean, you've got people like Richard Toll, senior, lead author with the IPCC, who was withdrawn despite being a lead author because he said that they were exaggerating the effects, particularly in the summary for policymakers, compared with what the discussions in fact held. So you've got to be very careful of that. The IPCC, as well as being a scientific organisation, is also highly political.
Lee Rhiannon, is it highly political?
Oh, not at all. I find that extraordinary to hear statements like that. Thousands of the world's scientists are part of the whole IPCC process, and it's something that's been going for years. If anything, some scientists are now warning that the IPCC has been cautious and that the rate of damage from rising sea levels, from greenhouse gas emissions, can be much greater and much more extreme. And the extreme weather events certainly have been linked to climate change. A responsible government would take the precaution and ensure that we look after future generations. And we know we can have a win-win here. Like the way Australia has locked itself into dependence on fossil fuel, when China, Germany, so many countries are now sucking up the contracts in terms of renewables and wind energy. The benefit for the economy, jobs is huge.
On one point, because this is a very broad debate, but one point you raised there, that extreme weather events are linked to climate change. The advice from the Climate Council and others is that you cannot link any particular event to climate change. Perhaps the frequency, though, you can. Dennis Jensen, do you accept that?
Either. No, that hasn't increased either, David. And in fact, when you have a look, for instance, at hurricane and cyclone activity, if anything, there's been a reduction. There's been no acceleration in the rise in the level of sea level increase. In fact, if anything, there's been a slight deceleration. And I mean, it's important to note that sea level has been rising for 10,000 years since the end of the last ice age. It's been rising over the last 1,000 years. It's not something that's, well, suddenly we're putting out CO2 and suddenly sea levels are rising. They've been rising for that period of time.
The scientific community have been very clear of not linking climate change with specific extreme weather events, but certainly in terms of the change in weather patterns and to the frequency, that certainly has now been well documented.
Okay, well, no. Dennis Jensen, just a final one on this. If you don't believe there is climate change happening, what do you think then of spending billions of dollars on direct action?
No, David, first of all, let's get it clear. Climate change is happening. Climate change has always happened. To pretend that there was
man-made climate change.
Yeah, to pretend that there was stasis before human beings got on the scene is to be foolish. And I mean, you've
Sure.
seen the IPCC have acknowledged that there's been no increase in global average temperature in this century since 2001. The thing is, direct action, the beauty of the direct action policy is that the policy not only, let's assume that I'm wrong and that human beings putting out carbon dioxide is a problem. It addresses that. But let's assume that I'm right on the other hand. It still addresses things such as increasing agricultural yields and so on. So, you've got to have a policy where you not just tackling a perceived problem, and if that perceived problem is in fact not a problem, you're just wasting money. You need to have a policy that addresses it from both aspects, and direct action does exactly that.
All right, look, we wound up in a climate change debate here, but just getting back to the Senate, and perhaps we can finish with one area where there might in fact be a bit of agreement. Does Tony Abbott have a mandate for paid parental leave, and will common ground be found between the Greens and the Liberals to get this through? Dennis Jensen, to you first on that.
Look, the paid parental leave has been taken to both elections. I think clearly the public realised that paid parental leave was part of our election platform, and therefore it's something where clearly there is voter assent, if you will, with the policy.
And you're right behind it as well?
Paid parental leave is clearly a workplace entitlement, and we need to ensure that. But we do have this budget coming down that looks as though it's going to be savage. And if it's going to be savage to a lot of disadvantaged people, we then need to be looking at our priorities. So it's certainly a work in progress for us. We're committed to paid parental leave. We just need to ensure that no sections of our community become worse off. And it looks like that'll happen under a coalition government.
Well, the Greens, I think, have said you'd be willing to accept a cap of $100,000 income for this particular scheme. Dennis Jensen, would that be a sensible outcome?
Well, I'll leave that to the negotiations. I don't want to preempt whatever the negotiations come out with. So let's wait and see how they pan out.
Indeed. Well, we will see. I think that'll be one rare area of agreement between the Liberals and the Greens in the many issues that will face the new Senate. Dennis Jensen from Perth, Lee Rhiannon in Sydney, thank you very much for joining us this